Well, hello and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life, which I think if you're my age, you may remember buying bags of broken biscuits. Well, I think that's what this episode is going to be a little bit like. Hopefully you'll find some of your favourites, but it's going to be lots of little bits and pieces. Let's see how we do, shall we? The current situation in America cannot be ignored. It's as simple as that. The idea of this podcast is that it's about photography, and of course, that's what I'll try and stick to as much as I can. But I can't lose my sadness, I suppose, about America at the moment. The reason is that when I was growing up, as well as buying bags of broken biscuits, America was everything. It was the American dream. It was American graffiti. It was American photography, artists, music. It was everything that I didn't have growing up in the UK. It was colour TV and TV dinners. It was fridges and freezers. Who could imagine such a thing as a swimming pool in your backyard? I certainly couldn't growing up in South London. And therefore, everything about America to somebody growing up through the 1970s and 80s was exciting. When I finally got to work in America, I worked in New York and I worked in Seattle. I had offices in both. My dream, I suppose, was a little bit not destroyed, not broken, but some realism was brought to it. Suddenly I realised that America wasn't the America of the films and the TV shows that I'd so enjoyed. However, it didn't stop me walking around the streets of New York with a CD Walkman in my pocket, listening to Gershwin. I thought that was an incredibly romantic thing to do, and the right thing to do. Now, the American dream and that American allure seems to be tarnished. And for a lot of people, that it's gone. People younger than me, generation, I suppose, Z, X, Y, and A, which is the newest, are more drawn towards the Far East, to Korea, to Japan. They're not as excited by the American dream. This was kind of brought home to me recently when I was looking at photobookstore.co.uk, which I highly recommend, run by Martin Amis. And he posted, as he does every year, what he considers to be his best photo books and also his best-selling photo books. And his top 4 photo books, best-selling photo books in 2025, I think point to this, I suppose, rejection, may I use it that strongly, of America and American culture. Certainly from a UK, perhaps also European perspective. So the number 1 best-selling book was by Yashiro Ogawa, Into the Silence. His second best-selling book was also by Yashiro Ogawa, Lost in Kyoto. His third best-selling book was Masahisa Fakasi, I hope I'm saying these correctly, and that book was titled Yoko. And number 4 was William Eggleston, The Last Dies. I think that in itself points to where people are looking to and what they're looking for from a photographic book. If you're listening to this in the United States, my thoughts are with you. They really are. I've got a lot of friends in the States who I talk to regularly. I follow American politics. I know how it's impacting on people. But at the same time, perhaps we're going through a period of reassessment, realignment. Why don't you let me know what you think? Talking of our American listeners, here's a message that came through to me from somebody in Saw-Anee, Tennessee. I like the way it rhymes. I'm sure I said it incorrectly. Anyway, it says this. Hello, Grant. Had my first listen to your podcast last night and thought much of it. Episode 160, Mark Steinmetz. Would you have a transcript or excerpt of Mark's answer to what does photography mean to you? I'm looking forward to listening to other episodes now. Thank you, David Andrews from Tennessee. Now, I didn't have a transcript, and I replied, and he used Otter AI to make his own transcript. I like that idea of you taking control of it there. But also it made me think that perhaps I should be putting transcripts up of those contributions over the years, various photographers answering that question, what does photography mean to you? If you're a long-term listener, you'll be well aware of them. If you're a newer listener, go back into the archive and you can hear them. There was a book which was made of a number of the transcriptions, but that long ago was sold out. So that's no longer in print. So what I've started to do is put some of my favourite transcriptions up on the website at UnitedNationsOfPhotography.com. So far, Claire Strand, Brian Griffin, Helen Vandermeen, and also Mark Steinmetz are up there for you to enjoy. So take a look. A message came in from much closer to home in the UK from Mark Lincoln Photography, who is a real supporter of what we do, and he's always engaging. So thank you very much for that, Mark. He said this: thank you for another insightful podcast. Wednesday mornings start with the podcast and a cup of tea. How very English. Nodding in agreement and often exclaiming, exactly, yes, and so forth from the kitchen, much to my partner's amusement, who recently told me she's learned a lot about photography through me, obviously, and listening in the background as she gets ready for work. She's not a photographer, she works in finance, yet recognises much of the analysis and strategies proposed for photographers. Well, as I always say, I love to hear where you're listening to the podcast, how you're listening to the podcast, and I suppose what you're drinking at the same time. So do keep those messages coming in. I started off this episode talking about my love for America and all things American. And the photographer I'm going to talk about now, I suppose, ties into that because I first came across him, upon him, many, many years ago. I think probably in the 1980s. Maybe a photographer that you're not so aware of. He's not a big flashy photographer that has lots of exhibitions, or there are some books of his work, but I think they're quite difficult to get. Anyway, I think it also falls into that category of photographers whose work you really love and then you completely forget about. When I first started working with a Hasselblad camera in the square format, it was this photographer who I think probably inspired me the most, primarily I think through composition and a sort of tonal range within his work. Anyway, who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about Ralph Eugene Meatyard. Great name, great photographer. And I'm going to read directly from a piece of writing from the Smithsonian magazine, because one, I think it's really well written and it gives you all the facts that you may want to know to try and encourage you, I suppose, to seek out his work. So one day in 1958 or 1959, Ralph Eugene Meatyard walked into a Woolworths store in Lexington, Kentucky. An optician by trade, Meatyard was also a photographer, a dedicated amateur he called himself. And he kept an eye out for props. He might drop by an antique store to buy eerie dolls or emerge from a hobby shop with a jar of snakes or mice cured in formaldehyde. In Woolworths, he came upon a set of masks. Over the next 13 years, Meatyard persuaded a procession of family and friends to don one of the Woolworths masks and pose in front of his camera. The resulting photographs became the best known of the pictures he left behind when he died of cancer in 1972 at age 46. That work, says the photographer Emmett Gowan, who befriended Meatyard in the 1970s, is unlike anyone else's in this world. Meatyard was born in Normal, Illinois, in 1925. He served in the Navy during World War II and briefly studied pre-dentistry before settling on a career as an optician. He plied that trade all his working life, 9 to 5 on weekdays, 9 to noon on Saturdays. But photography became his ruling passion shortly after he purchased his first camera in 1950 to photograph his newborn son Michael. 4 years later, Meatyard joined the Lexington Camera Club. Endlessly curious, he sought inspiration in philosophy, music and books, historical fiction, poetry, short stories, and collections of Zen koans. Zen and jazz were enduring influences. How many businessmen run Buddhist-style meditation groups over the lunch hour? Asks Gowan. Despite his self-proclaimed status as an amateur, Meatyard soon became known in serious photography circles. In 1956, his work was exhibited beside that of Ansel Adams, Aaron Siskind, Harry Callahan, and Edward Weston. 5 years later, Beaumont Newell, then director of the George Eastman House, listed him in Art in America as one of the new talents in American photography. In the late 1960s, he collaborated with the writer Wendell Berry on The Unforeseen Wilderness, a book about Kentucky's Red River Gorge. In 1973, the New York Times called him a backwoods oracle. His last major project was the family album of Lucy Bell Crater, a series of portraits of his wife, and a rotating cast of family and friends. It was published posthumously in 1974. The project's title was inspired by the Flannery O'Connor story, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, in which a woman introduces both herself and her deaf-mute daughter as Lucy Bell Crater. In Meatyard's book, everyone is masked, and everyone is identified as Lucy Bell Crater. As Gowan says of his friend, he was so many people all mixed up in one. The bookish Zen jazzmeister also served as president of the local PTA and the Little League and flipped burgers at the 4th of July party. Meatyard was a quiet, diffident, charming person on the surface, says his friend, the writer Guy Davenport, but that, he added, was a known ruse of the American genius. And there's a beautiful piece of writing there about a photographer who I really encourage you to check out. That writing, I should say, was by David Zaks, who's a freelance writer living in Brooklyn, New York, and is a frequent contributor to the Smithsonian. So, Ralph Eugene Meatyard, great name, great work. Check it out. I guess Meatyard really sums up to me what I thought America was. Slightly strange, exotic, challenging, exciting, adventurous. And there are many photographers out there who still make work that show us America, the America like that. But our social media feeds, our magazines, our newspapers, our TVs, YouTube, are all full of a different kind of a vision of America today. But photography has never been more important. The terrible crimes that have been committed by ICE agents have been captured on mobile devices with the moving and still image. The moving image gives us a true sense of narrative. It gives us a sense of being there. And obviously the quality of recording today is incredible, bearing in mind the conditions that the images are being made in, whether that's during attacks and smoke or at night. But it's the still images that stay with us. And there have been a number that have come out of the recent situation in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. The photographer on the floor throwing his camera away as he's wrestled by ICE agents and handcuffed. The images, the still images that have come out of the two terrible killings. The still images that show us the violence on the faces of those masked. I can't even think of the word, to be honest with you. I find it beyond troubling. I suppose you could say agents. Agents of misery, agents of death, agents of anger. But it's a still image that still comes out for me as being the image that will stay with us for the longest period of time. But the moving image and the still image are evidence. They're criminal evidence. They're evidence that can be held up in a court of law. But they're also evidence of man's humanity to man and to woman. They're evidence of a history. And they take me back to 1968 and the riots in America at that time. The images of the students being killed at Kent State University. And these are images which I first saw in the Life compilation book of photography, which I've spoken about previously on this podcast because it was one of the first books I ever saw as a child, which introduced me to the horrors of the world, to be honest with you, the things that were happening in the riots in America, in Vietnam, alongside, obviously, other elements of or other things which photography can bring us. But they were the evidence of a time that I thought had passed. Obviously, that's not the case. That time has come back. And the citizen journalist, the citizen photographer, is documenting that reality. But the professional photographers are going in there and coming out with something much stronger. Much stronger in that it has a visceral quality. And there are a couple of photographers who I think are really producing incredible work, which I'm sure will be recognised with Pulitzer Prizes and so forth, and perhaps World Press Photo Awards and all of that side of things. But none of that matters. None of that really matters. At a time when AI is being used so frequently to create falsehoods and lies, we have to be careful. We have to be careful that what we're seeing is true, and therefore we have to ensure that our sources are true and that our sources are checked out and that we can rely upon them. And I think that's a really key thing for photographers going forward, is to develop that moral stance, that moral barometer, to ensure that we can be trusted, that our images can be trusted. One of the ways of doing that is to avoid huge amounts of post-production, taking our images into another realm. We've got to, as much as possible, ensure that we get it right in camera and that the images we show are not open for either interpretation or accusations of AI manipulation or AI falsity. Been quite a serious podcast this week. I hope you don't mind that. I think it's relevant. It's very hard to be flippant when things are so serious. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying what we're doing this year. I hope you're enjoying the Proustian quiz, I should say, which a lot of you have got back to me and say you are enjoying. So that's really great. We've got a very interesting photographer coming up this month. Yeah, this month. From America, who has very much been an insider in the political world. Anyway, wherever you're listening to this, however you're listening to this, please, and I cannot say it more sincerely, over the coming weeks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, take care.